My name is Celeste. The wedding invitation was sent to my office address, not my home. Beneath the lavish, all-caps phrase, "Family is forever," there was a handwritten note. Due to limited space, we kindly ask for your understanding in not attending. The problem was, the event was being held at the lakeside villa that once belonged to my grandmother, the land where my childhood had been wrapped in the scent of ripe apples, where she used to rest her hand on my shoulder and say, "You'll always have a place here." Now, I had been crossed out like a stranger. Have you ever been erased from the very place that once called itself your home? Leave a comment if you've ever felt excluded from your own life just because you didn't fit someone else's mold. If this story touches something in your heart, hit like and subscribe to hear what happened next. When I returned, not to ask for a seat, but to build a space no one could erase my name from again. I grew up in a household where everything had a clear mold. Girls were supposed to be gentle, by my mother's definition, sit quietly at family parties and embrace the kind of safe life she called respectable. But I never fit into any of those molds. Since I was a kid, I loved to draw. Not the cute wall art my mom liked to show off to neighbors, but garden layouts, walkways, porches, living structures I dreamed up from the little garden behind my grandmother Eleanor's house. I want to build spaces where people can breathe, not ones that box them in, I once said when I was 10, chalk in hand, sketching clumsily across the cold concrete wall behind the chicken coop. She laughed, her eyes glinting beneath the brim of her straw hat. "Then don't let anyone build walls around you, Celeste. People don't live by bricks and stone. They live by space to breathe." She was the only one who understood. My mother, Darlene, was different. In her eyes, my dreams were nothing but short-term worries. She didn't yell or scold, but the way she looked at me every time I talked about landscape design or my idea of starting a natural restoration project, it was always that half-smile, half-cold look, like I was a silly little phase they were waiting to outgrow. "That kind of stuff won't feed anyone," she'd often say, cutting me off in that flat tone. "Other girls become nurses, teachers, they have salaries, insurance. But you, Celeste, you live in those fanciful sketches like the world doesn't come with bills." My brother Brent wasn't mean. Convinced he was right. He always thought I was trying too hard to be different. He followed the script, finished college, got married, had kids, worked at a family friend's company, and never upset anyone. I didn't blame him for choosing that path. But I was always the quiet disappointment, the unsolvable equation the family skipped over. Thankfully, I had Eleanor, my grandmother. She'd once been a biology teacher, but spent her life in love with botany and green space design. When my dad died in a car accident when I was 10, she took me in for a long stretch at the lakeside house. There, for the first time, I got to be myself. We gardened, tested soil, kept flower journals. She taught me to see things not with my eyes, but with their purpose. No plant was unnecessary, no idea was foolish, and no child was wrong for being different. Those years, maybe the only ones I truly felt safe. Felt chosen. After college, I married Noah, a mechanical engineer with a soft smile and hands that always stayed warm. We used to think we had time. We dreamed of opening a small farm up north, blending green space and ecotourism. But life doesn't always go according to plan. When I was 32, Noah was diagnosed with an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. It came like a storm and swept away everything we had planned. The treatment costs were staggering. Insurance covered only part of it. When I reached out to Mom and Brant, they said, "Nothing," Mom told me. "You need to be more realistic, Celeste. He's not going to make it. Don't throw everything into something inevitable." But I couldn't give up on him. I sold my inherited share of the lakeside property, at a price far lower than market value. Someone quietly added a large sum into my account. Eleanor. No note, no explanation. A short text. "When everyone else walks away, I'll still be here." Noah passed away at the end of that spring. All I had left was a suitcase, old design sketches, and a hollow I couldn't even describe. Seattle became the last beginning. I rented a small third-floor studio in an old building. By day, I did freelance landscape design for suburban homes. At night, I taught yoga classes to make extra income. No one knew I'd once lived a different life. I never told them about the lakeside house, or about the last time I stood there, by the water, holding Noah's shirt that still smelled faintly of antiseptic and wild daisies. I never said that land had once been the only place I didn't need permission to exist. I knew Eleanor had weakened a lot since last winter, but I still thought I'd make it in time. Yet news of her death came even later than the funeral flowers. An old friend of hers, Iris, who used to work at the town library, sent me a short email, unable to hide her confusion. Dear Celeste, I hope you've received the news. Your grandmother's funeral took place last week. Darlene said she didn't want you flying back suddenly in the middle of storm season. I was sad not to see you. I read that line over and over. She didn't want you flying back suddenly. My mother had decided. I didn't need to know my grandmother had passed. I called Brent. He picked up on the 8th ring, voice tight. Celeste? What's going on? Can you explain why I wasn't told about Grandma's death? Mom said, you were overloaded. We didn't want to add more stress. You'd been through a lot. I clenched the phone, forcing down the lump in my throat. Wasn't it my business? She was my grandmother, the woman who raised me for years when Mom couldn't. I get it, but the service was small, simple. Grandma always said she didn't want anything big. I hung up mid-sentence. I returned to town in mid-March. The rain was light, misty, like the early years I spent by the lake with her. The house was still there. The roof had been redone, the apple trees pruned, like a commercial campground. At the wooden gate stood a new sign, the Darlin Family Retreat, where memories blossom. Blossom. They took my grandmother's name and turned it into a business slogan, and mine? Nowhere to be seen. She once told me, on a spring afternoon when I was 16, and we were sketching a garden inspired by Southern California. If one day you're no longer here, but your ideas still bloom, then that's home. The apple tree, where she and I once hung a burlap swing, had been uprooted. In the place, a portable pool and 2 rows of picnic tables covered in red and white checkered cloth. I stepped up to the porch, ready to knock, but stopped when I saw the sign. Private event, no walk-ins. A few days later, I got a call from the family attorney. Celeste? I'm calling regarding your share of Miss Eleanor's estate. I thought everything had already been settled. Well, in the original will, Miss Eleanor left you the northern section of the lakefront, about 1/3 of the total property, including the garden and path to the water. She left it to me? I repeated. Yes, but after her passing, the family signed a modification agreement citing that you couldn't manage it from afar. They proposed to buy out your share at a supportive price. And I signed that? According to the file, yes. Through legal proxy. An e-signature document from 3 months ago. They said you agreed needing money for your husband's medical care. I remembered that contract. An attachment Brent had sent via email under the subject line, paperwork needed soon. At the time, I was on shift at the hospital. Noah was unconscious. I didn't even finish reading the document. They knew. And they waited for that exact moment to sign away the last dream I had left. I sat for hours in a rental car parked outside the retreat gates. From the outside, everything looked peaceful. A big family was taking photos. My mother wore a green coat, standing in the center, beaming. Brent stood to her right, one arm around his wife's shoulders. Little Ellie held up a handwritten sign, "Family is forever." And me, the one who put her life on hold to care for her husband, who had tended every inch of that garden since she was still in diapers, I wasn't invited. I wasn't even remembered. I looked down at my hands. The same hands that once dug soil, sketched paths, nurtured roots. They weren't shaking anymore. I opened my notebook, flipped to an old page. The one where I'd first drafted the lakeside garden when I was 19. The sketch was still there, but maybe it was time to draw again from the beginning. The land they claimed might be beautiful, but what I was about to build, they'd never see it coming. I returned home in early June, alone, with a bouquet of wild daisies I'd picked by the roadside. The small hillside cemetery was empty, just the sound of wind brushing through tall grass and baby birds chirping in the oak tree above. Her grave rested at the far corner, simple, neat, and true to who she was, unassuming. I sat down and laid the flowers gently beside the stone. My hands traced the carved words. Eleanor Hartman, 193-52022. The one who sowed seeds without needing spotlights to see her garden bloom. I smiled quietly. Still her, still soft, even now. I stayed nearly an hour saying nothing, only writing a few lines in the leather-bound journal she'd given me at 18. On the way back, I thought I'd stop by the old lakeside house to see it from a distance. But as I turned the corner near the main gate, I had to slam the brakes. Right in front of me was no longer the old house with white fences and gravel walkways. It was a lavish wedding venue, decked out in sheer white fabric, soft golden string lights, and a grand floral arch. Built right where my grandmother's apple tree used to stand, the tree she and I had cared for since it was a trembling sapling, where I used to sit for hours sketching, with her beside me reading under the cool breeze and the slow passage of time. Now, it was where they had set up the wedding altar. I rolled down the window and heard laughter and voices echoing from the backyard. A woman with a clipboard was giving instructions to the catering staff, while Ellie, my cousin, wore a fitted white dress, trying on wedding shoes beside her mother. I stepped out of the car, heart pounding as I walked toward the fence. The same little girl who once chased after me at 7, calling out, "Celeste, teach me how to draw a bunny," now stood, smiling sweetly, in a scene that had once been my entire world. I gathered myself and approached the gate. Someone from the event team stopped me. "Sorry, this is a private rehearsal for family only." "I'm family. I want to speak to my mother." "Darlene." A few minutes later, my mother appeared. Still trim, wearing block-heeled shoes and a cream cardigan. Her eyes met mine like she was seeing someone she used to know but had been out of touch with too long to feel close. "Celeste, why are you here?" "I came to visit Grandma's grave. Saw the lights and thought I'd stop by." "Oh, right. Ellie's wedding is tomorrow." "It's been busy." "I know. It's just, if possible, I'd like to attend. Nothing big. I won't bother anyone." She looked away for a moment, then responded, slightly, but sharp. "Celeste, don't make this uncomfortable for everyone. You know how things are. People are used to you not being around for events like this. Don't confuse Ellie. You're saying, they're used to me not being around. Celeste, you chose a different life. No one's blaming you, but no one really knows where to place you anymore. Everyone has a spot, you understand." "Ah, but you are understand. So you're afraid I'll make people uncomfortable. But no one was uncomfortable when I was cut out of every photo, every name, every reunion. You're overreacting. No one can keep everyone happy all the time." I turned away before she could say anything more. Got back in the car, closed the door, in the dark, watching the twinkling lights on the porch where Grandma once hung the fabric lantern I'd made in 5th grade. Right then, I knew I would never step inside that house again as someone who belonged. And in that moment of stillness, I made a clear decision. I wouldn't ask for a seat anymore. I would build a place no one could erase me from. I returned to Seattle with something I'd never had before. Silence that didn't tremble. No one knew I had gone back. No one called to ask why I was quiet during the family wedding. And I didn't feel the need to explain. I spent 3 days in my studio apartment. No email, no phone. Only writing. I redrew the lakeside garden from memory. A new design, keeping the old spirit. Shaded native plant paths, a small pond for migrating birds, a winding moss-covered trail leading to stone benches just like the ones Grandma and I used to sit on. I named the project Eleanor's Circle. Not a park, not a resort, but a place to return to. Without knocking, I started drafting the permit applications, listing properties marked as neglected heritage under the city's Green Space Restoration Initiative. While searching for partners, I remembered someone Grandma once mentioned. Miles Reynolds, a real estate developer who had worked with her on a community project over 15 years ago. I sent an email, brief, professional, expecting nothing. 3 hours later, Miles called. Celeste, my goodness, I remember you! You were the one who insisted on designing a mangrove garden in that trash-filled neighborhood when you were, 21? I laughed. I still think it was a good idea, Uncle Miles. Not bad at all. Eleanor used to say, that girl has a foolish head, but a heart that knows how to plant. We scheduled a meeting. I brought the drawings, presented the plan to restore abandoned land around the lake and turn it into public space, instead of another commercial venue. Miles stayed quiet for a long time after looking at the sketch. Finally, he said, Eleanor would have been proud, and I'm very interested. But there's something you might want to know. He opened his laptop and showed me the current land ownership map around the lakeside villa. The main house still belonged to my mother, Darlene, but all the peripheral land, the lawn, boat dock, main access road, and the southern tree line, had been mortgaged to the bank to finance the wedding. They're in financial trouble, Celeste. Looks like the loan was more than they could manage, and that land's being quietly listed for sale to avoid drawing attention. Miles looked at me, his eyes careful. Do you plan to do anything? I straightened up, looked him in the eye, and said slowly, I don't want to destroy them, but I want to protect what's left of her. We discussed the legalities, market price, and how to keep everything discreet. Within 3 weeks, through a limited liability company, Arbor Loop LLC, I signed the purchase agreement for all land surrounding the lakeside house, including the access road, parking lot, and dockside walkway. I kept everything private. Didn't inform anyone in the family. And when the lawyer delivered the final title deed to me in early July, I stared at the black letters on white paper. Sole proprietorship, peripheral grounds, property 41A, Lake Lenora. I didn't need permission to keep the memories that were mine. And this time, if they wanted in, they'd have to knock on my door. About a month after Ellie's wedding, my family began receiving strange emails from a company called Arbor Loop LLC to the owners of property 41A, Lake Lenora. We are writing to inform you of changes to the usage rights concerning the main access road, west side parking lot, boat dock, and lakeside walking path. These areas are now legally owned by a third party. All activity involving these areas must be registered with the land management representative, in accordance with current regulations. I imagine it took Brent at least 2 reads to fully grasp what was happening. My phone rang at nearly 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. I hadn't planned to answer, but I'd begun learning how to face things without backing away. Celeste? Brant's voice barked the moment I picked up. No, hello. Yeah, I'm here. The access road. The dock, too. What's going on? Who's behind this arbor company? At that moment, I was watering the small garden behind my studio, where I'd started replanting native grasses once found at Lake Lenora. I let the water run, then said, that company belongs to me. I bought the land. All of it, legally and transparently. After seeing how far the lakeside had drifted from what Grandma wanted. You waited and schemed while we were planning a wedding? No. I did what someone should have done from the beginning. Preserve what Eleanor planted instead of bulldozing it for party lawns and slogan signs. Brent was silent for a few seconds. Then he let out a bitter laugh. You're so petty, Celeste. You weren't invited to the wedding, so you went this far? No. I did this because I was cut out of family events for 8 straight years. No one checked if I was even breathing after my husband died. They edited me out of Grandma's funeral photo, like I was never part of her life. And they built a wedding arch right where she and I once planted that apple tree. Brent suddenly changed his tone as if realizing the edge in his own voice. So what do you want now? Usage fees? Annual permits? Or do you want us to ask permission every time we walk to the dock? I don't want anything. I didn't do this to make money. I did it for clarity, so no one gets to treat me like I'm invisible anymore. That same afternoon, my mother called. I didn't pick up right away. She left 4 missed calls and a single message. Call me back. This has gone too far. When I called, her voice sounded calmer than Brent's, but strangely tired. You really did this, Celeste? Yes, I bought back what used to belong to Grandma. No one's been taking care of it properly. You're dividing the family. Doing this puts everyone in an awkward spot. How are we supposed to keep things normal? I looked at the cold cup of tea on my desk and said, You said keep things normal, but for 8 years normal meant I wasn't at a single family gathering. It meant being referred to as the lost one. Is that the normal you want to protect? I heard her exhale lightly through the line. You know, ever since Noah passed, I haven't known how to talk to you. I didn't know how to comfort you. And Brent, he thought it was best to leave things alone. I smiled, not from anger, but because leave things alone was probably how I lost my place in this family to begin with. I didn't do this to get revenge, Mom. I did it because I needed a space where I wouldn't be erased from memory, a place Grandma once promised would always be mine. And if I can't be in that house anymore, then I'll be around it, literally. And this time, no one can take me off the map. I didn't know what she was thinking, but I suspect she understood this wasn't about reclaiming land. It was about reclaiming existence. I hung up after one final sentence, said in a calm voice. I don't need anyone to invite me back. I'm not knocking anymore. I have the key now, and this time, I built my own door. Brent sent an invitation by email. The subject line read, Brent and Naomi's wedding, the new beginning for the whole family. I opened the attachment. The image showed a lakeside home adorned with string lights, white-painted wooden arches shaped like a fairy tale, and the caption beneath, where the old place becomes a space for reunion. I didn't respond right away. Not until 3 days later, when another email arrived. Not from Brent, but from the family's attorney, requesting temporary usage of the main access road, dock, and lakeside area under my ownership. The message included this line, We hope to share this space in good faith as part of a healing effort. I thought about that word, healing. A beautiful word, but laughably fragile when placed beside 8 years of silence and exclusion. I showed up on the day they scheduled the site review. The sky was overcast, the wind light, the lake perfectly still. I didn't come alone. With me were James, the legal representative for Arbor Loop LLC, and Sienna, the landscape architect working with me on the Eleanor's Circle project. I wore a long gray coat, my hair tied back, and carried the blueprint rolled neatly in a plastic tube. When we arrived, Brent was standing with the event team on the lawn beside the dock, the same spot where my family had once celebrated our first Thanksgiving after Grandma took me in. Naomi, his fiancée, stepped forward and shook hands politely, while Brent looked at me like he couldn't believe I'd actually shown up. Celeste, you really came? You invited me. We thought. You understood. This was about bringing the whole family together. I understand perfectly. That's why I brought the site plans to present the boundaries of the area I manage. Brent frowned. There's no need to get formal. You know we can just talk. I placed the plans on the event team's temporary table and unrolled them. It showed a complete layout of Eleanor's Circle, the ecological restoration garden, including a gate at the dock entrance, a new water system, and vehicle restrictions near sensitive zones. I pointed to the dark gray section. This entire area is now a protected conservation space. It's not available for commercial activity or large-scale events. Any program with amplified sound, staging, or fireworks requires prior approval and must follow scheduled time limits. My mother arrived at that exact moment. She looked at me, then at the design, her face changing. "What are you doing, Celeste? This is your brother's wedding, not one of your advocacy campaigns." "No, Mom, this is a boundary, the one I've been asking this family to understand for nearly a decade." Brent slammed his hand on the table. "You're ruining this wedding out of pride? Because you weren't invited to summer trips or Thanksgiving dinners? I used to ask for nothing but a seat at the table. I offered to help pay for gatherings. I asked if there was space for me to bring my child. And every time, silence, or an awkward smile and the words, 'It's probably not a good fit.'" My mother's voice trembled. "We're family. Celeste, how can you turn your back like this?" I felt nothing in my chest, but it no longer hurt. "Mom, I used to beg to be part of this family. I used to try to hold on to anything that felt like connection. But the version of family everyone's defending? It only applies to those who fit, who are easy to manage, easy to accept. That's not me." Rent stepped closer, voice sharp. "What now? Ban everyone? Lock us out? Build a fence around your pain just because you feel left out?" I answered slowly, clearly. "No one's being locked out, Brent. But if you want to enter this land, you need to ask. The same way I used to, and no one ever replied." Sienna placed a small wooden sign on the rack near the dock. It bore the Eleanor's Circle logo and the laser-engraved words, "This space was made to remember, not to forget." Naomi, who had stayed silent until now, finally spoke up. "I understand. This matters to you. We're not here to fight. But is there any way we can share the space?" I looked at the young woman, a stranger who owed me nothing, and for the first time, I saw something genuine in someone from this family. I didn't answer right away, but I knew. I hadn't entered this space to ask for a seat. I came to define the boundaries of what remained, the boundary of respect. I returned to Seattle on a cloudy morning, the kind of weather that always made me feel safe. No need to shine, no need to please the eye, enough light to see what my hands were doing. On my desk, between stacks of drawings and renovation quotes for the West Garden of Eleanor's Circle, there was a strange envelope. Along with it, a fountain pen labeled Miss Celeste. I recognized the handwriting instantly, soft, yet tightly formed, like someone trained in old-style cursive. "Ellie." I sat down and carefully opened it. "Miss Celeste, I should have written to you a long time ago, but honestly, I think I needed to live a bit more to even begin to understand what you went through. And now, I think I'm starting to. I understand the feeling of standing in a crowded room where no one really sees you. It's like to always be sweet, agreeable, well-behaved. Because if not, you're the one making things uncomfortable. I don't know how far you had to go, literally and emotionally, just to find a place where you didn't need permission to exist. But now I get it. And I'm sorry. Not because I was favored while you were forgotten, but because I stayed silent. I thought my silence was harmless, but now I know. Sometimes, silence is just picking a side. Thank you for not erasing everything. Thank you for keeping that garden. Not for yourself, but for people like me. And the kids who come after us, who are still looking for a place where they don't have to ask to be let in." I held the letter, tracing the final line written in slanted ink. "Your niece by blood, but someone who's learned more from you than the rest of the family combined." I thought of little Ellie, with her soft curls, always tagging behind me asking questions about leaves, dirt, and sky. I remembered tying her shoelaces in the apple orchard, her choppy giggle when I made up stories about talking forests. I'd never been angry with Ellie. I was angry at how the family made her the poster child of what was right, just to highlight how off course I was. I placed the letter in the desk drawer, beside a wooden box that held Eleanor's keepsakes. A gardening knife with a worn wooden handle, a shard of porcelain painted with a laurel branch, and the watch she used to wear every morning on her lake walks. Outside, a light rain began. I made tea, set it on the window ledge, and settled into the old fabric chair, now sun-faded. There were no voices of protest in my mind anymore. No accusations. Only the image of a dirt path, young trees taking root on either side, and a small wooden gate waiting for its final coat of oil. I thought of Ellie, not as a witness to the past, but as one of the first seeds willing to sprout after everything. On the day Eleanor's circle officially opened, there were no ribbons, no speeches, no applause. I placed a small wooden sign at the entrance, hand-carved with a single sentence: "If you've ever been called an outsider, step in." It was the last thing Eleanor ever said to me. On the summer day, I left town with a notebook full of sketches and a heart shrinking from how big the world felt. She looked at me through the window, waved gently, and said those words. Soft as breath, but deep enough to carry for a lifetime. Eleanor's circle took nearly 8 months to complete. 35 native planting beds, 2 therapeutic gardens for cancer patients, an open learning area for children, and a winding path to the lake shore, built with reclaimed wood and lined with ferns. When Ellie arrived with a group of elementary students from the North District, I was kneeling, trimming lavender near the bank. Miss Celeste, you still crouch down the same way you did when I was 8. Her voice carried down the path, full of the lightness I hadn't heard in years. I looked up and saw the bright smile of the little girl I once knew, now a science teacher, guiding an age group I'd once thought would never understand how much nature matters. Trailing behind Ellie were about a dozen kids, most in light jackets, holding sketch pads, colored pencils, and maps she'd printed. "This is the person who created this place," Ellie said, turning toward them. "Are you an architect?" asked a brown-haired girl with pigtails. "No. I'm someone who remembers what it feels like to be forgotten," I said, smiling. "And someone who knows that, sometimes, the most beautiful things grow in places no one was looking." I guided them along the gravel path, showing the wildflower restoration zone, talking about soil microbes, native bees, and the hybrid apple tree we planted where Grandma once started her first seedling. As I spoke, I noticed Ellie pause. Her gaze drifted toward a small sculpture beneath the old oak tree. A figure stood silently there. I recognized the posture immediately. My mother. Alone, she stood, with her cardigan buttoned up, one hand gently gripping the strap of her purse. Her eyes didn't meet mine. In front of her was the recycled material statue of Eleanor, crafted to match her true height. Beneath it lay the same familiar engraving. I walked closer. She spoke quietly. "It's more beautiful than I imagined. It wasn't built to be imagined, just to help someone remember." "You did all this by yourself?" "And people helped, but the hardest part was not letting anger lead the way." I could feel the tremble in her palm, as if she was holding back words. At last she spoke, brittle like wind rattling dry leaves. "When I found out you bought the land, I was angry, not because you did it, but because I realized I hadn't done anything to keep you. I don't blame you for not keeping me. I was hurt that when I needed to be seen, you looked away." "I know." She inhaled, then lowered her gaze to her old shoes, now caked in damp soil from the path. "Your grandma once told me, you don't have to understand that girl. Just don't put out her fire." You said the same thing to me. "Could you show me where the new apple tree is?" "I can, but you'll have to walk slowly. The stone path isn't fully cured yet." "I'm not in a rush," she replied. And for the first time in years, her voice carried no expectation. I walked ahead, she followed, and the kids sat drawing under young olive trees. Ellie's laughter echoed from the southern garden. "Where tomorrow, I'd place a stone bench for anyone who wants to pause without needing a reason." At Eleanor's circle, no one has to prove they belong. All they need to do is step in. I sat on an old wooden bench by the lake, sunlight melting onto the water, like warm honey. The oak beside me whispered softly, casting shadows over the surface, turning lavender gray. Next to me lay a dark leather notebook, the one Grandma Eleanor gave me when I started college. The pages were yellowed at the edges, but the drawings still sharp. Memories that needed no guardian. I flipped to a page near the end. A circular garden plan with a stone pedestal at the center for her statue. In my young handwriting beside it, a place where no one feels out of place. As I traced those lines with my fingertip, I heard small footsteps nearby. A girl, short hair, holding a hardbound sketchbook, stood quietly, watching me. "Ma'am, do you live here, or are you visiting?" She looked about 8, one of the newer students from the local school's Thursday afternoon class called Designing with Nature, led by Ellie. She'd never spoken to me before. I smiled. "I don't live here. I live in a city a few hours away." She tilted her head, still unsure. I placed a hand on the notebook and added, "But I built this place, for people who were once pushed out, to walk in freely, without asking." She looked around. At the statue, the stone benches, the wildflower beds. "So is this your home?" "Not a home to live in, a home not to be forgotten." She didn't say anything else, just sat down beside me and opened her sketchbook. "Last week, I drew the lake, but I got the sun wrong." "There's no wrong sun," I said gently. "Some days, it just rises later than we hope." A breeze passed through. The scent of eucalyptus, wild grass, and damp earth from the afternoon watering mixed together. That scent I once thought only existed in memory. The girl began to draw again, quiet and focused. And I stayed quiet too. Sometimes, presence needs no words to be real. The sun dipped lower, casting amber across the lake. I lifted my notebook, closed it. My hand rested on the worn cover as I whispered. Not for her to hear, but for myself. I didn't go back to the old house, Grandma, but I built a new one. And this time, no one can erase my name from the door. In the distance, under the setting sun, the carved wood sign shimmered softly. "Welcome to Elena's Circle, a place that remembers you." No walls, no locked gates, only a quiet promise that anyone who's ever felt forgotten now has a place to belong. Have you ever felt like you were pushed out of the very place that once called itself family? Ever had to rebuild from pieces not to stand out, but not to be erased? I didn't seek revenge. I didn't tear anything down. I simply built a place quiet enough to hear those who had been missed. And if you've ever carried the ache of being treated like an afterthought, maybe you'll understand why I didn't return to the old house. I created a new one. One with my name and the shape of someone who believed in me, long before I believed in myself. Share your thoughts about this story. Who did you relate to most? What do you think is worth keeping and what might be time to let go? Don't forget to follow this channel to hear more stories that speak to the realest parts of every family. The place where hurt may begin, but healing can too, in a way no one expects.